Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth SAARC talk series by Dr. Marium Kamal from Pakistan. Welcome, Dr. Marium Kamal. I'm Dr. Beena Gandhi Deori, Deputy Director Research, SAARC Cultural Center, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Before we proceed further, I'd like to invite Ms. Renuka Ikanaike, Director, SAARC Cultural Center, to give her welcome address. Over to Madam.
Okay, good afternoon, dear Dr. Marium Kamal, distinguished guest. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome you all to the fifth session of our talk series on cultural heritage and cultural diversity in the SAARC region. The vibrancy, depth, and richness of our shared culture in the SAARC region is unparalleled, and gatherings such as these allow us to learn and appreciate it even more. The main objective of this series is not merely to celebrate our shared heritage and diversity, but to understand how these elements can contribute to sustainable development. By recognizing and respecting our cultural heritage and diversity, we pave the way for a more inclusive society promoting values of unity, mutual respect, and cooperation. Today, we have the privilege of hosting luminary in the field of South Asian Studies, Dr. Marium Kamal, Assistant Professor from the Center for South Asian Studies at the University of Punjab, is here to shed light on a fascinating topic, political philosophy of Arthashastra. We are eager to hear Dr. Kamal's insights on this significant topic and its implications for the present day. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Marium Kamal for generously sharing her knowledge and time with us today. The exchange of ideas and perspectives is invaluable, and we are fortunate to benefit from her expertise. To our audience, thank you for gracing us with your presence. Your attendance and engagement make these sessions worthwhile and fruitful. I invite you to immerse yourself in today's discussion, ask questions, and contribute to our collective understanding. We hope that this session, as well as the entire talk series, will serve as a valuable resource for you. In conclusion, let's embark on yet another enlightening journey of understanding and appreciation of our rich and diverse cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Before we begin, I want to briefly outline the format of this talk. After the lecture, there is a Q&A session where participants can raise their viewpoints. Please remember to keep your comments focused on the topic at hand and be mindful of the time so that we can cover as many perspectives as possible. Now let me introduce the speaker of the fifth SAARC talk series. Dr. Marium Kamal is an assistant professor at the Center for South Asian Studies, University of Punjab, Lahore. She has done her doctorate in international relations from the University of Punjab, Lahore. She did her one-year postdoctorate from the Center for South Asian Studies, University of Cambridge, UK. Her area of research is about South Asian politics, security, terrorism, and foreign policy, with special focus on India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Moreover, she also regularly contributes on current affairs in different newspapers and electronic media. And this afternoon, Dr. Kamal is going to speak on a very interesting topic, that is political philosophy of Arthashastra. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Beena, for all the cooperation, and thank you, Dr. Veronica, for your comments and remarks. And I'm really pleased to be here First of all, I would like to start that why I have chosen this topic. Usually here, from a different school of thought, we study more about the Western political thinkers and the Muslim political thinkers. But the thing which really inspired me that the absence of indigenous knowledge, absence of the people or the political thinkers belong to the South Asian region. So that was the main reason behind my curiosity and my selection of this area, that I wanted to basically explore the political analysis or thought or philosophies, especially in the background of international relations. We often refer to Chanakya's policy about my enemy's enemies is friends. So that was the basic idea behind my selection for this topic. So though when I started researching about this topic, it was a huge and massive contribution, which definitely cannot be covered in 45 minutes. Neither I think that that I can really cover all the aspects with a very potentially, but though have tried my best in order to pick up the most important aspect, and it's relevant to the contemporary scenario. So the topic is which I have chosen, that is the political philosophy of our Arthashastra, which is extremely basically massive, a huge, and has a very broad spectrum, and it is definitely covers the horizontal political aspects and the vertical as well, which I'm going to discuss later into one of my conclusions as well. So as I introduced the topic and what exactly the motivation behind this conversation or talk today, that I really want to promote the indigenous South Asian knowledge. What I believe that where we lack as a South Asian state, that we are still carrying somewhere our colonial legacies. We are somewhere still follows the things which doesn't belong to our indigenous heritage. I'm as Dr. Renuka said about the shared culture. So here I'm speaking about the shared knowledge of the South Asian region. And build up relevancy to our intellectual South Asian heritage. Secondly, I'm exploring the ancient political philosophies and its contemporary application. And surprisingly, it was after doing this research and studying the concepts, Kautilya's philosophies and Arthashastra, I felt that there is a very close linkage with the current foreign policies of the South Asian states with this ancient political philosophies of this political thinker. However, coming to the topic that Arthashastra, which is definitely very known to you people, talks about the statecraft. It is one of the greatest contribution which came around the 3rd BCE to BCE, around that time period. It's a unique contribution. It is basically covers the perspectives which now we are practicing them. So that is the basically beauty of this writer. The Arthashastra provides a political philosophy to unify previously small political units. It's not just about the global politics, though it speaks about the allies, it speaks about the global politics, centrality of the conqueror, but it also talks about the small political units or a cohesiveness. So that is another perspective of this book. It wills divergent groups into a broader cohesive identity and integrate diverse linguistic groups as well. So this is what all about the cohesiveness of this book. That is, as I said, it operates vertically as well as horizontally. The thing which I have analyzed and I have seen throughout reading about Arthashastra, that the point which I analyzed, that supremacy of the reason. Though it does not negate religion or divinity, but it talks about the supremacy of the reason, the rationale, the logic. And that was the beauty of this book. Though we know and we're clear about the philosophies, the religious philosophies of the region, and it laid a very colossal impact on our policies, current, on previous policies, but the supremacy of reason and rationale at that time was really something new, innovative in itself. So the political ideas and the concepts in ancient India are older than the Arthashastra, definitely. Despite having a religious overtone, it was not the theological or religious in nature, as it merely underlines the vital fact that political authority has to operate within a world of relationship, which by their essential nature have a moral foundation. Though they didn't negate the moral foundation, but beside that, they built a rational, logical, reasoning based statecraft policies to run the monarchy. So that was the analysis which I have picked from this book, that the thing which and then you can relate it even now. If we relate it to the contemporary scenario, you can see that the rational choice theory of Adam Smith is very much equal. Definitely it's not similar, but you can relate the logical or the reasoning concept of this book, Arthashastra, with the concept of rational choice theory. Moreover, a very important development, this was in the 6th century BC, was the emergence, though there were some kind of other aspects or contributed against the divine philosophy and religions, which is known as Lokayat philosophies, which did not accept the authority of the Vedas and underline the supremacy of the reason. So, however, as I said, I really want to put it in more clear words, that basically it didn't deny the moral foundation, it didn't deny the religious perspective, but it built a reason based statecraft policies. So this is what I really want to elaborate here. The legal structure, it gave a legal theory as well, which I'll be discussing it later. It was subordinate. The legal structure made the sacred law subordinate to the state law. Kautilya seems to have taken significantly divergent view from his predecessors on the relationship between the sacred law and the state law, upholding the superiority of the Vedas in relation to the history and the custom. But whenever there was a divergence between the history and sacred law, or between the evidence and sacred law, at that time, sacred law was prevailed. But when the matter came in accordance with the sacred law and the sacred law in conflict with the rational law, the rational law prevailed in that sense. And the reason which was given behind this, that the reason shall be held for the reason shall be held authoritative for the original text on which the sacred law has been based is not available. However, the rationality, the concepts of Kautilya that emerged as being solid. Whenever there is something rational or logical or based on reasoning, that gains more acceptability among the people. And this is the only reason that still Arthashastra or Kautilya's political philosophy is relevant to this world as well, or this time period, or this contemporary arena, because it is based on reasoning, it is based on rational approach, it is based on the logic, which basically justifies the human brain. The second point, which I have analyzed and inferred from his perspectives or write-up or his theories and his analysis, that he was a realist in his perspective. We do see that the people are moving, most of the realist philosopher, realist theorists now considered to be fallen realists. We do not want to follow the same traditional perspective anymore. We follow the social constructivist aspect now. We want regional connectivities. We want win-win situation. We prefer relation based on mutual trust, mutual benefits, and dialogues, building the institutions like definitely as we have SAARC, ASEAN, United Nations, European. All this talks about the realist, against the realist perspective, talks about the ideals or institutionalism. But he was in nature realist perspective. What I believe, after relating his philosophies to the contemporary analysis of the region or the global analysis of how we can see the alliances are happening around in the South Asian region, and what's happening, the alliances which has been made in the Indo-Pacific region, and how the global clash currently between US and China is mounting our policies at the regional level. So these are all realist perspectives. These are not basically idealist situations. It is all clash of interest. It talks about the power struggle. It talks about hegemonic intentions. Though Kotelia never talked about the hegemony, he talked about expansion within the South Asian region, because he took the South Asian region as one unit. At that time, definitely in his time period, there was no concept of nation state or states or boundaries or territorial differences. It was a nation, it was the region emerged, the Indian subcontinent, it was one unit at that time, more or less. Though, as per the history that which I have read about the South Asian history, the region was never united under a single power. Never it was, but most of it, most of it was under the control of different monarchies at that time. So he talked about expansion, he talked about alliances, he talked about the enemies, and the concept of Ari and Mitra, but he didn't talk about the hegemony. He didn't talk something which is beyond the boundaries of the South Asian region. So his influence was within the South Asian. His inferences, his analysis was based about this region, which is quite convincing, I believe, for that time period. Now things have changed and evolved. There are so many contributing factors or regulatory factors that has impacted our perceptions, our analysis, our theories, that things are evolving continuously, and we're making theories and building approaches according to our own need and new perceptions. Every era has its own analysis, has its own dimensions or priorities. So according to his perspective, he was a realist in his perspective at that time, and he didn't believe in hegemony. He believed in a realist analysis perspective regarding the South Asian region or the Indian subcontinent. So, and interestingly, the base points on which he based his political philosophy, it's very similar to the international relation theory of realism. Its base content means the assumptions more or less are similar. As the first, he says, the man by nature is selfish and suffer from issues such greed, lust, desire, and which to dominate other. This is what we talk about if we look at the 1970s book, Politics Among Nations, Morgenthau's book, in which he defines the concept of power, he defines the concept of realism. He talks about that human nature is evil, and they basically, it's always in a struggle to attain power or to sustain that power. And the second point assumption which Kotelia gives here, that this kind of anarchic environment basically give the birth to conflict between communities within the individual, and this continuity of conflict ultimately leads to creation of anarchy. So here the second point, beside the rational perspective I told you earlier, that anarchy was the second element I found very similar and very relevant to the international relations of today. Still, we believe that the environment is very anarchic. And at that time, when I'm talking about the 3 BCE, when he came with the Arthashastra and his political philosophy and his in-depth analysis about the basic ingredient of anarchy, presence of anarchy, whether it's at domestic level or at the regional level or at the global level. So that the concept of anarchy, it's extremely, I mean, it's. I was reading somewhere on that the basic books in international relation, in order to understand the king's responsibilities to other states, we usually refer to Machiavelli, the Prince book. And I heard my teacher told me that when Machiavelli was writing the Prince, at that time in his library, father's library, Arthashastra was there. So Prince, the most referred book by Machiavelli in international relation or global politics, has been basically influenced by the Arthashastra of Kautilya. So the concept of anarchy is basically traveling. This is our indigenous heritage. This is our intellectual heritage, which basically now we mostly in our work we refer to the Western political thought, because now they talk about different perspective, they relate, because now the fulcrum is over there in terms of knowledge. But denying this indigenous heritage is a loss for the South Asian region. However, coming to his main concepts as the concept of the state, though in international relation we say that the state is a concept which emerged in post World War II after 1945. When we take with the concept with the emergence of nation states, we talk about the territorial boundaries, we talk about the sovereignty. At that time, he talked about the sovereignty. He talked about the state, though the state construction is in his writings is not that clear, because the only system he offered in Arthashastra was monarchy. He didn't talk about the state exactly as we are now talking about the state, because things have changed. Definitely, there is an evolution process which is undeniable in its nature. So, the concept, but he had some concept of a state and head of state as a monarch. So, he believed in monarchy. And now, what we are practicing, that is democracy. And it is my analysis, and I am still, according to what I have analyzed throughout my research journey, that democracy is something really appreciated, but not indigenous to the South Asian region. It's a Western philosophy. It's part of the US world order. It is in line with the concept of capitalism. Democracy is something which US really wants to see as a superpower in the developing states or the developing region. But the concepts of this region is more defining the concept of monarchy. However, the monarchy in Arthashastra is different than the monarchy in Europe. The monarchy in Arthashastra, the monarch is not as empowered as in the European law at the European time. At that time, the monarch was the absolute power. But here in Arthashastra, the monarch is basically answerable to the people welfare. If the monarch is not working according to the dharma or the divine law, or not fulfilling the people's welfare, and is not fair in its term, in its basically directions, so he is not basically eligible to be a monarch. So the monarchical concept is bit different. The monarchy in Arthashastra under the concept of the state is different. However, coming to the concept of the state, that more or less there are three theories which has been discussing different concept of the state. One, that the theory of divine origin, that we are all know, and about the theory of divine origin, that the God has nominated someone to be on earth and represent the people and work for the welfare of the people, the theory of divine origin. The second theory, which talked about the social contract theory, in which the people are they surrender their liberties to one person in order to get the security or the welfare which they require. And that is very much similar to the concept of Gramsci. It is not exactly, but you can relate it to the concept of hegemony of Gramsci, when hegemony is influenced, or hegemony works when the people give their consent. So here in social contract theory, the people surrender their liberties or give consent to one person to dominate or be the monarch. So this was the concept of the state. And lastly, the evolution theory, which talks about definitely evolution process, in which the rationale or the relational ideas and provides an account of what kind of society, what kind of monarchy or system is basically required, or how things can be improved gradually. So as I said, the state concept of state is not clear exactly, or cannot be related to democracy as well in the contemporary scenario. So moreover, he provides a clear definition about the state as an entity comprising of several elements, in which he talks about the king, the ministers. And the most interesting thing, when he talks about the king, he talks about specific qualities. The qualities of the king, as I said, that he has limited power, limited monarchical power. It's not exactly as the European monarchical structure. It's not absolute in its nature. Secondly, it gives a detailed and very tough list of requirements to be a monarch, from in terms of physical, social, mental, capable, knowledge requirements, which is very tough, though it is very difficult to get such kind of person in the real world, not that practical anymore. But however, to some extent, we always select the best, most suitable person to be the king. That is something very, organic to me, I felt, and still relevant as well. Now, still, if it is in democracy, we do look at the qualities or capabilities of the person who has given the authority to rule or to basically run the government. The second thing was the second element, which in a state need to be the presence of ministers. Again, there was a very tough list for the ministers for their qualification according to Kautilya. It was again their to which family they belong, what kind of capacity, capabilities, knowledge they have, their educational background, their mental health, their physical health, their knowledge, information, so on. There were so many things in terms of minister as well. This is again very relevant. The people, it's third point, the people and the country, people. And it is not about the thing which I was telling you, the vertical perspective in Arthashastra, which talks about the people, the country, the people. And he talked about the social issues, the social welfare, the subject, the women empowerment in precisely, and how how the social perspective can be elevated, can be enhanced, and how women can be empowered, their status can be elevated, and what is basically the basic need, how to meet the basic need of the people, how this country can be changed to a welfare society. So this is the vertical basically analysis when it comes to the social perspective. Because when we come talk about the social perspective, definitely we're talking about the rooted or grounded realities, the social aspect, the welfare of the people. So this is the third element of the state. And then he talks about the fort, which is definitely Durga, the fort, the construction in terms of security and how to basically secure your people. This again comes in terms of safeguarding the state and the people as well at the same time. Then he talks of the treasury, economy. Now these things, these points, any one of them, you cannot definitely eliminate them from the current scenarios. And lastly, he talks, he talks about the army, build up a strong army. For again, the security perspectives come here. And lastly, he talks about the Aryan Mitra, the friend, the ally. So alliances, and surprisingly, we say that international relations started or after this 1945 Second World War, but this is the first traces of the concept of alliances and diplomacy with respect to international relations in the history. So as I said, that monarchy is a system which has been chosen by Kautilya at that time. And now why monarchy? Why not democracy? He talks about the people welfare, but monarchy, the concept of monarchy, two reasons which I have come across, that because monarchy was existing from the beginning, that was one of the reasons, and Kautilya's philosophies, political philosophies, were not basically built in a void. There was a basically heritage from other scholars as well, who basically were gradually contributing in the political philosophies or political science of that time. So Kautilyan philosophy is basically carrying a heritage or a tale of information, which basically at the end of the day, it was shaped into Arthashastra. So the concept of monarchy at that time was part of the system, one of the reasons. The second perspective, which was reason giving, that why he chosen monarchy, not democracy at that time, because the divinity perspective as well, the religious, as we talked about the divine theory, in which we is just mentioned that the god has nominates someone who's worthy of being ruler, or gives that authority to a person who can rule his subjects. So these 2 points or reasons were given at that time, that why Kotalia didn't talk about the democratic perspective, and he was more into the monarchical perspective, or his statecraft Arthashastra is based on the monarchy perspective, though it is not anymore relevant to our system still, but we can see there's so many monarchies in the world yet working, and different, somewhere in ceremonial as in UK, and somewhere are basically very assertive as in Saudi Arabia. So things are definitely relevant still, but not in terms of democracy in South Asia. So I talked about the king qualities as well. That when there is a monarchy, there is a king, and the king can come through divine forces, and king can come through by his qualities, acceptability of the people, legitimacy as well. Though he mentions exactly that kingship is not hereditary in nature. It is more, it definitely, that the qualities of the king or the Swami is very important to add in the king's quality. So the requirement to be a king. So it is not exactly hereditary in nature. So that is, again, he is somewhere lying not exactly between a pure monarchy or pure democracy. Somewhere he is justifying his analysis through logic. So here what he is saying, that he is giving more weightage to the qualities of the king on the claim of hereditary. So again, we are going back to the irrational perspective, his logic and reasoning, which dominates this book. And it is wonderfully, because that is the strength of this book, because that's the reason it's still relevant today, and it's basically acceptable by contemporary people as well, and political scientists. As coming to the powers of the king as well, as I said, that the power of the king are limited. Its nature. If the king is not delivering and is not working for the people welfare, and not getting acceptability or legitimacy by his subjects, so he won't be qualifying to be a king. That is again something very liberal in its nature. He spoke about several theories, which definitely cannot be covered in this talk. But the most important theories which I have chalked down today, that is the Saptanga theory, which is one of the political theories that talks about the state components, which I have already told you, that about the king, ministers, and the Durga, the treasury, justice and force, and ally. So let me read something for you about this Saptanga theory of Kautilya. Can be understood in terms of his theory of conflict, driven by the greed and lust and struggle for domination over the others, seen in the context of establishing supremacy of power. Kautilya's concept of power finds expression in this Saptanga theory, which tells us about the 7 prakritis that represent the state power. State power is no longer an abstract. It is very much now clear. Definitely we can relate it to Morgenthal's power theory, in which it is elaborated very well, and power. So this is again relatable to realism, his perspective. So state power is no longer an abstract relational magnitude, but an aggregate of material and immaterial variables. Now here again you can relate it. When we talk about material and immaterial variables, it is related to the soft and hard power of nowadays. Now every state has a soft and hard power, which is basically they mostly what they do, they accomplish their hard or realist mean through soft power. That implies that the state power can be operationalized by breaking it down into seven components, which is Sapranga theory. Thus, the state power can, if not precisely measured, at least by adequately evaluated and estimated, that includes assessing the positive or negative developmental trends of each of these seven components of state, which I have discussed earlier. So I can do every component in itself is a study, is a research, and it has a very in-depth analysis which cannot and can be discussed separately, and how can be related separately in its analysis. So the second theory, which was very attractive for me, that the conception of law in Arthashastra, the concept of just and rule of law. So this is a huge contribution of his time period, that the categorization of law into civil and criminal laws. Very minutely, he basically he analyzed and he wrote or codified the criminal laws according each punishment, which is, I mean, this is something when you are beyond, it's not political science. If we're talking about being a jurist or writing criminal laws or civil laws, and distinguishing between the civil laws and criminal laws, and what kind of punishment can be given to sustain peace in the societies, and how can the marginalized group or the minorities as women can be supported in terms of these law and can get their earnings and justified or dignified lifestyle. Secondly, codification of these law. And it was not only codification, the codification was with the procedure as well, that what kind of procedure and how many panas has to be paid to every or punished in terms of fine. Everything was written. That really, I'm student of law as well. It was really relevant, the way he codified that legal structure and legitimize the power of the king and his subjects and their right. By codifying this law, he ensured the legal rights to everyone. That basically when I talked about the cohesiveness of this book, that when he bringing balance between the subject and the kings. Lastly, social just and women empowerment, in which I have analyzed, and it was very wonderfully and very satisfying the way he wrote about women empowerment and how basically to legalize their rights and how to give them space to the women, unprivileged women in his time period. Kautilya believed that judicial fairness and law-based protection of the people would protect his world and the next, and this is what he has proved in his writer. The theory of interstate relation. This is the last theory which I would like to talk, and this is one of the most famous, mostly international relation. We refer Kautilya under the concept of this mandala, or the concept of my enemy's friend. So mandala means a circle of states. So the concepts, though we are here talking about that his insight was about the Indian subcontinent, but beside that he talked about the state, other state entities. State concept is not that clear. Definitely we can give margin to him, because now things are more technologically understood, elaborated. Now things are more clear, easy to understand of his time period. But still, he had a concept of some, not exactly state, but some enemies as Ari and some allies as Mitra. So he talks about the mandala concept, which is circles of states, which is 12 kings, in which the neighboring states are always enemy. And it is very interesting. We can see it if you look at the regional politics right now. all the neighboring states are having, though we are on a SAARC platform and we are talking about cultural shared cohesiveness and shared knowledge, but there is on the political side the element of animosity and hostility is still present, the conflict. So this what Kotalia is referring to the neighboring state, that the neighbor state under the foreign under his interstate relation or the theory of Mandala is basically an enemy, which called Ari, and then there is the neighboring state of his enemy will be called as ally, Mitra, and so on. You can move this up to 12 kings. And again, then after that we have another enemy, and then Mitra's Mitra. So this is how things work. So this is how beautifully, though it is with somewhere you can say at the regional level it is quite logical, but things have moved on as well. We talked about the economic welfare, we talked about the win-win situation as well, we talk about regional connectivity, we talk about freezing a conflict as well in order to sustain our economic relations, our social context. So somewhere that his mindset was extremely traditional or absolute traditional in his analysis, but still relatable to some, not exactly all of the scenarios, but definitely to some of the scenarios. We can see how alliances are happening in the Indo-Pacific region, and the formation of BRICS and the formation of Quad and Indo-Pacific alliances, and how basically the G20 summit, which is recently concluded. So this kind of alliances, this is very rare in international relations, that somebody wrote about such kind of alliances in BCE 3. So this is the importance of this theory, that it's very original idea which basically floated at that time in Arthashastra, which talks about alliances based on mutual benefit, alliances made on interest, state interest, alliances based on power relationship, alliances based to empower someone or to lessen power or weaken a state. So this theory is basically, it's obviously at that time international relation was not a different subject from political science. It was everything was falling under the global politics or political science discipline. So this theory can be applied, as Barry Buzan has divided, that if within the region it is basically domestic politics, and what is extra real, for example, if India-Pakistan, that is domestic perspective, and if it is regional perspective, it's India-Pakistan, Afghanistan. If it is extra regional, then it's India-Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, and if it is global perspective, that is India, Afghanistan, China, and US. So how this things, and now still, like Barry Buzan, which is a very contemporary and fallen realist, he divided the foreign relations and the policies into levels. Similarly, here we can see Kotalia that he is dividing his policies theory of interstate relations or the theory of Mandala into different levels, into different groups or into different circles. And it really, this theory itself and a separate subject which can be talked on it, because how every state will be working, behaving, what kind of security they require, what kind of relationship they can build, what kind of expectation what are the expectation towards a weak state, what kind of expectation and relationship with a power, how two powers can relate with each other, what is the role of conqueror. When I was reading about the role of conqueror in Mandala theory, it was really gave me related it to the concept of superpower in the international relations or the world order. So the conqueror, now you can relate it with the domestic perspective, with the regional perspective, or with the global as well. It's free, it's up to you, because social sciences definitely give you that much broad canvas to play, to draw anything according to, definitely with the justified arguments. So the concept of alliances, as I said, one of means rare in its nature in this time period of history, and none of the European or Western thinkers have talked about the concept of alliances before Kautilya. So he was the first who talked about the alliances, and he defined these circles or these level on which alliances can be built in order to support the center, in order to protect the power or the state interest. This is how at that time obviously there was no state, there was a monarch, and the role of monarch in basically building alliance with the surrounding or circling states, or it can be at domestic level as I said, or the regional level. So I would like to conclude on my analysis that I talked the things which I have inferred. I said that anarchy, one of the basic component, which since I'm a student and I'm basically reading about the international relations, global politics, anarchy is a very sustained element. And it was very surprising to find the concept of anarchy in Kautilya's perspective. When there is anarchy, there is a realist perspective. Anarchy is always there. War of survival, forces of goods and bads, and the forces and military and economic buildup, all these things which basically sustains anarchy. When there is anarchy, there's definitely war of survival. There is definitely forces goods and bad. There is definitely alliances. There is definitely some states which are Mitra and which are Ari, not in support of that monarch. There is always issue of security dilemmas, military build-up, nuclear build-up, which is very much relevant to the South Asian region and the politics here. So this is our intellectual history and heritage, which we have somehow ignored. And I believe it's not limited to a one state. As I was reading somewhere that the major chunk falls under India with respect to Arthashastra, but his university was in Texla where he studied, which is currently lying in Pakistan. So that diversity very attractive for me, that it is not basically can be related to a single state. It's definitely South Asian intellectual heritage. Though I do not ignore India's major chunk in it, but it is relatable to every state in South Asia. The second point of my analysis, which I have proved, I believe, rationality and logic, ascendance of rational perspective on the sacred law. And here it is again, we have a long debate on it when we talk about, if we look at the French Revolution, when the church was separated from the state. So the debate was there as well, that the religion was separated from the state structure, and they talk about secularism as well. So secularism is not about basically absence of religion, it's basically separation of the state matters from the influence of the religion, or the ascendance of rationality or logic on the sacred law or divinity. So this is how things, though some states still follow. This is something not exactly, I'm not here to justify a state or negate another state, or I'm just trying to be a neutral in this perspective. As scholars, we are advised on this level to be very neutral and bring the cohesive perspective to justify every person, every thought. So the rationality, prevalence of rationality over the sacred law. So it means this is again can be related to, as I said, in Europe, when the church was separated from the state and the church power was basically decreased at that time, and the state assembly was basically in the people, or a rise of individualism, all these things which supports that rationality prevailed in that time period. But still we can see that in this element is somewhere ignored in this region, that sometimes the sacred law, they come, they supersede the rational perspective. But according to Kautilya, rationality sustains and prevails and supersede the sacred law when it is needed. The last thing of my analysis, that I found him a strategist. Every aspect, operating vertically or horizontally, it was strategized in a very well manner. It was He was basically at the center, in which he was looking at the internal dynamics and the external dynamics as well at the same time. He was fortifying the external dynamics with the presence of the allies and the power structure and the interest, and safeguarding the he talked safeguarding the maritime as well, because I have seen some aspects about the maritime mandala as well, and I talked about the Indo-Pacific. So he was basically talking about the external perspective as well, horizontally, and the internal dynamics as well. When he talks about the king's power, when he talks about the legitimacy of the king if the king is not delivering for the welfare of the people, when he talks about the qualities and requirements of the king and the minister, which in which who are given the who will be given the authority to rule, when he talks about the just and codification of criminal and civil law and the welfare of the society, the social perspective, and the empowerment of the women. These dynamics are not basically external dynamics, these are internal, vertical dynamics, which is basically providing legitimacy to the conqueror from the internal and providing legitimacy with terms of allies externally through the conqueror. So, this is the way how to basically strengthen or empower the center, the conqueror, or your power at the centrality. So this was the beauty of his strategy. It was operative on every level, and somewhere it was overlapping as well, but strengthening each other. So that was the my analysis after reading Kautilya. So I will end this talk on his note that Kautilya suggests three types of strength: intellectual strength, the power of dialogue and deliberation. Would definitely SAARC is there to support this intellectual strength, the power of dialogue and deliberation, a prosperous treasury economy, which is very important, and we can see that every state, especially with respect to India, they are doing very well in terms of economy, and strong army. Now this is the traditional perspective. Still cannot be negatable if I can say that US possesses a strong army, China has a strong army, Russia has a strong army. So cannot be negated at this time period as well. So these are all the strength of a sovereign country. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marium Kamal, for bringing out such important aspects of Arthashastra. And now I request the participants if they have any questions to ask the speaker.
One thing before you start your questions, I'm from a very different school of thought. It's a very minor contribution from my side. I really tried my best to basically cope up with everything, but maybe I don't possess that in-depth analysis because it's a massive contribution. It's a massive write-up, which is definitely needs a lots of time and struggle and time period. Thank you.
So, are there any questions from the participants?
Dr. Kamal, thank you very much for can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I have one, actually it's more like not a question, inquiry, because you stated at the beginning of the talk that Machiavelli, when he wrote The Prince, he had Arthashastra in his library. This is something I haven't heard before, so I was curious where you got your information, and also which language did he read it. And the other thing is just a comment. I know that I've read both Arthashastra long years ago, Machiavelli, as well as Analects, but since that's not my interest, I've never studied it at depth, but I've referred it to at various instances. So my question is, or my comment is that, has any work been done comparing two Asian similar studies, that is Analects of Confucius and Kautilya's Arthashastra. Can you comment on that also?
Sorry, I didn't get your second question. Can you repeat
Okay.
it?
Yeah, Kautilya's Arthashastra as well as Analects by Confucius, they are more or less in the during a similar time period, similar topics, and I'm wondering whether any comparison comparison has been done with the two, because when you compare Arthashastra with Western philosophies, it's totally different, whereas the Chinese philosophy is more similar, more of an Asian one, and there are a lot of similarities. So I'm wondering, do you know whether anybody has done any comparative studies between these two texts?
Okay, about Machiavelli's, this basically I didn't read it some anyway. But I told that during my talk that I heard it from my teacher. So I don't have any valid reference for that. I didn't read it anywhere. But because Prince Machiavelli also emphasizes on the role of king, and similarly the role of king in Arthashastra more or less is very similar to it. I read both of them, and though I don't remember exactly what Machiavelli, but the prince, the concept of the king and his duties towards his subject, and his basically what kind of role the prince has needs, that is was in Machiavelli's book. So I don't have any valid reference for that. I just heard it from my teacher. The second question is basically I didn't look at the Confucius school of thought, but while I was reading, there was quite similarities with one of the Chinese basically scholar who wrote about similar thoughts. And I don't remember his name exactly right now. It's not because I didn't focus on it, but it is. There are there. You, I can share it with Bina later. The name of that scholar, to which Arthashastra Kautilya's work is basically related to it, to the Confucius perspective, of the Chinese perspective. So though both these civilizations have their roots in it, and the political philosophy is more or less is basically rounds around the concept of power and how to secure survival. So I'll tell you exactly his name. I tell Bina about that. She can share it with you later. Thank you, Bindu.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Daya, please ask your question.
Okay, sorry. One question. This you are assuming that Kautilya was the person who wrote Arthashastra. But have you confirmed during what period in Indian history that he lived, and whether he wrote it all by himself, and also whether Kautilya and Chanakya, whether they were one and same person, because all those things matter when we try to analyze the Arthashastra and try to interpret it in today's scenario. Thank you.
Yes, I have seen the period that was 3 BCE, before the Common Era, and to somewhere CE, 3 CE, somewhere the Common Era. So this was the time period which I have mentioned commonly. But exactly, I didn't focus about the origin as in you are mentioning. I was more concerned about the political philosophy. Now he was the same person. There is some kind of have seen it, that there is some kind of confusion that who wrote it, but clearly there was multiple political thinkers before him. There was a very rich pre-Kautilyan period in terms of political philosophy, and which definitely affected and influenced his write-up. So both school of thoughts are there. Then whether he was the writer of Arthashastra or not, or he was influenced by other writers as well, and so these both existed together. So definitely in the social sciences and history, I remember that I asked one of my teachers that why history is so violent. So he said that we only codified the such incident. There's so many good incidents as well happened in the history, but we do not codify it. So sometimes the history is not exactly what has been codified. So there's diversity in the opinions, and this is how what research tell us to basically depends then on your rational and logic and reason that what existed and the maximum references you get in order to justify your arguments. So this how basically I work.
Okay, thank you. Because what I feel is that it is very risky to try to interpret the Arthashastra and the early political and economic philosophy and the ideas of ancient India without knowing when they were written or what influenced them either from inside India or from outside. And till then, we'll have to be very cautious of how we interpret them today. Thank you. And
Yes,
I hope that your further
definitely.
research will.
Definitely, there's. I agree with you regarding that, and this is what I have mentioned earlier that I'm from a very different school of thought, but it's a small contribution. I try to justify it. This is what I have mentioned from the beginning. There, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kamal, you have actually really summarized, you have rightly pointed out how Arthashastra offers guidance on various aspects of statecraft, diplomacy, law enforcement, and the maintenance of social order. And then you have also talked about, like how in Arthashastra he also Kautilya mentions about women empowerment, no? And all these concepts of law and just and this uh, categorization of laws into civil and criminal law, and how the codification of law with detailed procedures. So it's actually very interesting. Dr. Kamal, I'll just read out, or maybe, did Kautilya have an idea about the concept of democracy at the time? If yes, what were his thoughts on the subject?
Okay, this I think I have talked about the
Yes, I think so.
concept of democracy of Kautilya. He basically supported only one system, that was monarchy.
Monarchy.
He didn't talk about democracy, but the monarchy was different from the European concept. He was the monarch in Europe was more empowered and absolute in its nature as compared to the monarch in Kautilya's Arthashastra. The monarch in Kautilya was answerable to the welfare of the people. So here we can see it is not absolute monarchy, neither it's a type of democracy. So even in political science, when we teach these subjects, whether it's democracy, there is nothing concept absolutism is absent in politics or international relation. There is nothing 100%.
So anyway, thank you very much for your talk. So thank you very much for this thought-provoking lecture on the political philosophy of Arthashastra. On behalf of SAARC Cultural Center, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to Dr. Marium Kamal. Your deep understanding of Arthashastra's political philosophy and your ability to connect it with contemporary politics, it truly enriched our understanding of this ancient text. Let us continue. Let us continue to explore and appreciate rich heritage of political thoughts. That drawing inspiration from ancient texts like Arthashastra as we navigate the complexities of the modern world. So this is a very good start, I feel, and then I also like to express our appreciation to all the participants who actively participated, asking insightful questions, sharing their diverse perspectives. It is through these meaningful exchanges that we can expand our understanding for regional cooperation in the SAARC region. So for the month of October, we have another upcoming lecture. SAARC Cultural Center will bring the 6th SAARC Talk series, and the speaker is from Bhutan. So therefore, kindly follow updates on our SAARC website as well as our Facebook. So thank you all, and thank you very much to our speaker. Have a wonderful evening to all of you. Thank you.
And I really want to thank you, Beena Renuka, for giving me this opportunity. Hopefully, that I have justified and fulfilled all your requirements. Hope to see you next again. Thank you very much again, and bye.